In August of 2022, in Flagstaff, Arizona, a Good Samaritan pulled up behind a trailer being towed by a truck and saw that there were small human fingers poking out of the trailer. So immediately this person called the cops. And thank goodness this Good Samaritan did so, because what the cops uncovered was something that can only be described as disturbing and depraved. There were multiple women and underage girls inside that trailer. There was a makeshift toilet and a small amount of water in an otherwise unventilated trailer. And in the heat of August in Arizona, one can only imagine how uncomfortable that had to have been. So, what exactly was going on? And where does this case stand today? Well, today we are going to talk all about Samuel Bateman, the self-professed prophet of the FLDS cult. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post videos every single week on one of these topics, so if you're into this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. I also have a membership and a Patreon, so if you're interested in financially supporting the channel, please go ahead and do so down below, and I thank you in advance. So we're going to get right into today's topic. Once again, we are talking about an unremarkable and mediocre man who had no success in his life but had some really disgusting, depraved fantasies, so he decided that he would start a cult. But in Sam Bateman's case, he was really piggybacking off of the FLDS cult that Warren Jeffs used to be the leader of. But Warren Jeffs had been committed to a life in prison in 2006. And although Jeff had still been trying to manage this cult from the inside, it was proving to be very, very difficult. In fact, due to the fact that Warren Jeffs basically said that God's law is more important than human law, and he told his followers that they didn't need to pay taxes and property tax on land, well, a bunch of the land that had once been the cult's land ended up being reclaimed by ex-members. So in order to avoid his few remaining followers from getting kind of intercepted by people who had left the cult, he encouraged his remaining followers to basically flee the area where the cult had been stationed back in the 2000s because the land was being reclaimed by his ex-wives. And this is a really fun fact. His 65th ex-wife went and reclaimed the very home that Warren Jeffs lived in and turned it into a support house for ex-members, specifically women and children who don't have things like social security cards or birth certificates, and helps integrate these people back into society, which is so important and so valuable, and honestly just sweet, sweet poetic justice when it comes to Warren Jeffs and his disgusting, depraved behaviors. So basically, since ex-members were coming back and probably going to be spreading the word about how disgusting Warren Jeffs is and was, he encouraged his followers to spread out across the nation, and he would write letters to tell them the directives he was quote-unquote receiving from God. I mean, this is a classic case of information control. He wants to separate his remaining followers from anyone that might tell them otherwise, from anyone that might show them proof that he is actually the disgusting man that he was proven to be. So throughout the last couple of decades, this follower Samuel Bateman was known to be a very devout religious person. But some of his associates and quote-unquote friends didn't know exactly that he'd been involved in the FLDS cult. And he was noticing that there were still some members in the area and they needed direction too. So he kind of decided that he was the person who was going to step in and be the new leader. He would claim that he had a vision or a dream, that Warren Jeffs had met him on a mountaintop and told him that he was the new prophet of the FLDS cult. Yeah, sounds about right. In my opinion, I think that this is a guy who had some really perverted fantasies and preferences, and he was unsuccessful in most of his business endeavors. So he saw this as an opportunity to not only live out that depraved behavior, but also make money without having to really lift a finger and basically be doted upon and also get control, because he clearly did not have much control in his life. According to the affidavit, and we will be looking a little bit at this affidavit later, it was written by a special FBI agent who investigated Sam Bateman and listened to a lot of the recordings from the witnesses and the recordings that Sam Bateman literally created himself, because of course he did, because cult leaders love to document all the gross things that they do and then act like later they didn't do it. And it's like, dude, you recorded yourself saying these things. Like, that is you, that's you there on the screen, and you had someone record it. But that's neither here nor there. So in the late 2010s, Samuel Bateman goes to his wife. This is his only real legal wife. And he's basically like, hey, I've received a message that I need to take our daughter in as a wife. And his wife was like, absolutely not, and ended up leaving him. Thank goodness, because something that we've seen with a lot of the ex-members or even remaining members is all they've known is this really messed up childhood. All they've known is that women are basically meant to serve men in a capacity that brings the men to heaven, because one of the main stances of the FLDS is that in order to get into heaven, every man needs to have 3 wives. So they basically breed women to be wives and then marry off the children to people who are 70, 80 years old. And then the girls are forced or coerced into having relations with these men, even though they receive absolutely no education or understanding of what it means to do the act of having a child. They are just told that they need to serve their partner. So if you're brought up in that environment and that's basically all you know, there's really no wonder, no question why you wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. And you might not be so inclined to really question the authority of someone who is basically saying, I am speaking for God. But luckily, Sam Bateman's wife was like, absolutely not. There's actually a brief bit of this affidavit I want to show you right now that shows how disgusting Sam was towards his daughter. So Sam had taken like a family trip up to Canada, and on the drive back to the like Four Corners area, he is trying to kind of get his daughter to agree to do certain wifely duties with him. The affidavit reads, during the drive, Bateman asked her if she'd prayed about who she was going to marry. She said she did not because she was too young. Bateman told her that he felt like she was his wife, and she said she was scared and didn't say much the rest of the drive home. He told her that his feelings were right. He would make her have a child. When they stopped for a bathroom break, Bateman bought 2 big bags of Doritos and gave them to her, along with $50 like it was a bribe. Bateman asked her what kind of car she would want. Bateman also told her that he would take her on an airplane ride because he had taken her mother on an airplane ride when he married her. How disgusting and strange would that be if you were this young girl? It would be so confusing. Before arriving home, Bateman told his daughter to not tell her mother what he had said. When they got home, Bateman told his wife that he had a good feeling that the daughter was supposed to be his wife. His wife told him that no, she was not, and she would never be his wife. So then she took her daughter and moved out of Bateman's house and got a restraining order against Bateman. Thank goodness. Bateman repeatedly asked his daughter to meet him outside of her house, this new house. One time, his daughter and her little brothers went over to Bateman's house. Bateman gave her a hug and a kiss in front of her little brothers. Another time, Bateman gave her a, quote, nasty kiss, and she described that kiss as slobbery. Bateman had given her a cell phone so they could keep in touch. The daughter would text Bateman and say hi, and he would text back, I love you, I want to kiss you, I want to hug you. She said the way Bateman kissed and hugged her was weird. Bateman constantly said he wanted to kiss and touch her. Bateman explained to her that what he meant when he said he wanted to touch her. He described the body parts of a boy and a girl and said the names of those body parts and how they were used to make a baby. Bateman said that if his feelings were right, he would do what a boy does to make his daughter have their baby. That would be extremely disturbing and unsettling to have your own father talk to you about that. So his daughter provided the FBI agent with a journal of events where she documented the dates Bateman introduced his new wives to her, including all the young girls he took as wives and called mother. Imagine being like your father's wife and then his other wives call you mother. It's so disgusting. So, like I said, it just seems like Samuel Bateman was desperate at this point to find some control in his life. He had had a mediocre real estate career, and he was also what the affidavit calls a goal coach. Now, I don't know if that's like some type of like life coach, but I mean, dude, if you haven't achieved any of your own goals, you probably shouldn't be a goal coach, but I guess that's just my opinion. So his real and only real wife leaves him, creates a restraining order, but of course legally their daughter still has to have access to their father. I don't know the details around any sort of like custody agreement, but his daughter did end up becoming one of his spiritual wives. Very disturbing. And so since he was claiming to those remaining followers of the FLDS religion/cult, people believed him. They believed that he was speaking for God. They believed that he was like Warren Jeff's new mouthpiece because apparently, according to Sam, Warren Jeffs himself said, "You're the new prophet of this religion since I am in jail." And I also think too, that there were perhaps some people that were frustrated with the situation that Warren Jeffs found himself in because Warren Jeffs made all these rules after he had gone to prison. He basically was saying like, if I can't have intercourse and experience the pleasures of the flesh, then none of you are allowed to. And he basically forbade people from having intimate relations with their partners, and he forbade people from having children, even though contraception or birth control is not allowed. So basically he was like, if I can't have intercourse, all you have to be celibate, which I'm sure would be frustrating. So when this sexual deviant Samuel Bateman comes on the scene, he ends up gaining followers, both men and women, and he gets at least 20 wives, most of which are under the age of 15. Yeah. For one of his followers, he even convinced that man to hand over his wife and daughter to Sam. And this man, his name is Maroney, he begged Sam to not take his daughter. I guess he was like, my wife's fine. I get it. Like, these partnerships are signed by God, but not my daughter. Please don't take my daughter as your wife. His daughter was only 9 years old. But Sam basically said, no, this is what God wants. God wants me to take your daughter as one of my wives. So this little girl is 9 years old. And Sam Bateman decides that they are going to be sleeping in bed together. And remember, these young girls, A, they're not really old enough to understand certain bodily functions, and B, they don't know what they're doing. They're ill-prepared. They're minors. They cannot consent to the things that are being done to them. But apparently, since this little girl was probably scared, she's sleeping in a bed with a grown man who is not her father. He is most likely forcing her to do things, and she starts wetting the bed. And apparently Sam Bateman was like disgusted by this. And it's like, dude, one, children wet the bed, and two, specifically children who are experiencing trauma wet the bed. So you are causing this little girl to wet the bed because you are being a disgusting menace. What more? Like, it's like you are the cause of the problem, but you're going to complain about it as if there's something wrong with her. She's a child. It's infuriating. It's even more infuriating that he's basically claiming that all of this behavior is what God wants him to do. It's what God has made this little girl's purpose on earth, to serve Sam. And it's so, so sad. So as time goes on into the next year, 2020, Sam recognizes that he needs to maintain control of his followers. So what he does is he does something that Keith Raniere kind of did, and that was basically to force his followers to offer up collateral that he can use against them if he needed to later. So he was forcing his followers to make these confessions to him about sins they'd committed, and then he would turn around and punish them publicly for those sins. Public shaming is a tactic we commonly see within cults and high control groups because it makes that person so ashamed publicly that they are less likely to A, break rules, and they're less likely to confide in the people that just watched them get punished. And those people are less likely to go offer that person help because they're worried that they're going to get publicly shamed too. So it's this toxic, dangerous cycle that cult leaders use as a tool to manipulate people into obeying them. It's really dangerous and really sad. If anyone ever asks you to offer up some of your deepest, darkest secrets in order to keep up with your goals or achieve what you want, just do not do it. Keep your secrets, protect your past, because people will use it against you and they'll use it as a form of control. Since he's amassed about 50 followers, 20 of which are actual wives of him, it seems like almost all of his followers were supposed to be there to serve Samuel. Now, he would travel around 4 states: Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Nebraska. And while he was on his journey, he would literally cart around his wives and meet up with other followers and engage in what he called sacred ordinances and missions. And these are basically group sex acts, either with or in front of minors. See, Samuel was very obsessed with being pleased by his wives and essentially teaching the young girls who had no idea what intercourse was or why people did it. And he would basically force followers to sleep with each other in front of the children or with him in front of the children. And he would force some of his wives to all engage in the acts together. He would even film some of them and make other followers in other states watch. He would be on a live stream with them. Not a live stream, but essentially a Zoom on this secret phone app. He was basically trying to force his wives to teach the younger generations of wives how to please him, their husband. But not only that, he violated a lot of FLDS teachings because he was also having intercourse with the men. And in FLDS, they just do not appreciate or accept homosexuality in any capacity. But Sam, on the other hand, wanted to engage in something he called the binding of brothers, which was oral and intercourse with the other men or brothers of the group, and that keeps you connected for eternity. So he says that this is a directive from God. God wants him to sleep with this man, Moroni, whose wife and daughter he had taken as his own wife. So the very first time he attempts this act, he can't perform, he experiences impotence, and he gets enraged that the other girls in there, his other wives, aren't helping him get prepared for the act. It's yeah, dude, that's their fault that you can't perform. Yeah, it's these underage girls' fault who have no idea what you're even trying to do. It's disgusting. But apparently he would like literally berate these girls for him not being able to perform the act. But then, after a little bit of time goes on, he decides he really wants to do it. He wants to go through with it. And he decides to meet up at a hotel with these followers and Maroney once again. And he brings wine, which it's also against the FLDS to drink alcohol. So he's violating that belief too. So not only was Samuel recording these sex acts, getting collateral from his followers, he was also forcing them to provide testimonials about what a great leader he was. Like, did you not think that this was all going to come out? Now we have actual proof from the minors themselves about what you are doing to them. And one of the ex-members of the FLDS actually talks about this a little bit, but she talks about how when you're in it, you don't really understand what's going on, but you recognize that something does not feel right. And it's my belief that a lot of these underage wives at this point in time are starting to like feel like what's going on is not right. It does not feel like it should be happening. It feels scary to them. But to Sam, he's living his purpose. He is gaining a small following and he is gaining an even bigger ego. And he actually reaches out to the media because he wants to invite a reporter to come see the good work that he's doing with all of his wives.
Former 3TV reporter Mike Watkis has covered the polygamist community in Colorado City for years. Bateman insisted on meeting Watkis, and the two eventually met at a Phoenix park a year and a half ago. Watkis says Bateman was desperate for attention.
At that point, I realized he was sort of a flamboyant guy who was all about taking center stage. You know, many of the polygamists hide away from sight, from plain sight. Sam Bateman was one of those kind of guys that went out and embraced it.
So luckily this is in 2021, and the reporter actually reports this strange event to the police. In the same year, an ex-follower finds out that her family members are some of Sam Bateman's wives. Faith Bisline actually goes to the FBI and files a formal complaint, but she starts getting concerned because she doesn't have any like real tangible proof besides her own words. But it is wonderful that both of these people went to the authorities because the following year, when the police pull over that truck hauling the trailer with these girls inside of it across state lines, no less, they were able to be like, oh yeah, we've been getting complaints about this. This must be the guy that these people have been trying to alert us to. So the cops pull over this truck and this trailer and pour out these women. And I just want to bring up that apart from the fact that there's no ventilation, no food, no water, who knows if this is like where these girls were living, there's also no seatbelts. There's probably nowhere comfortable to sit. I mean, if they're going to sit right next to a toilet, I can't imagine that would be comfortable. I mean, they're basically getting carted around as if they're cattle. And in my opinion, not even animals deserve to be treated like that. So to treat human beings as if they're just these objects you can cart around from state to state in the dead heat of summer. This is Arizona in August. It can get 115, 120 degrees, and they're inside a trailer that has no windows. I can only imagine how hot, frustrated, exhausted they were. And because they are very conservative FLDS women, they're forced to wear long sleeves and long dresses. Under Warren Jeffs, the women were also expected to wear long underwear to basically cover themselves from like head to toe twice, so that like no skin showed whatsoever. But apparently when Sam Bateman took over, he started forcing his wives, including the young children, to wear lacy undergarments for him. What is wrong with you? Like, this guy deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. Preferably with no way to speak to anyone on the outside, because some of these women still to this day support him. So when you see the body cam footage of these women, it's very, very clear that they have been indoctrinated to not trust police officers or the government. And there is a lot of that within the FLDS, this us versus them mentality. And this is all intentional, because if you make it look like the people who are supposed to help members of society get out of scary situations are actually the enemy, then you're going to control people easier. You're going to make it that much more difficult for them to feel safe going to the police to ask for help, because you're basically indoctrinating people into believing that the police are the real enemy. So when you watch this body cam footage, it's very, very clear that these women, specifically one, the only one whose face is fully visible, it's very clear that she is like very combative and is not really taking the police seriously. It's also clear that they're trying to like record the police. Like 2 of the girls are carrying iPhones and recording the police. And it's just interesting to me because I'm like, you're just going to get your POV? Like, do you not realize that they have body cam footage? Like, I understand them wanting to protect themselves, but at the same time, it's like heartbreaking to me that they don't recognize that they're actually the ones being abused and the police are actually there to help them.
Does everyone have water? Anyone like needing water or anything?
Yeah,
you guys? Okay, we'll do that as soon as our investigation is done here, okay? You're not free to go because we are conducting an investigation.
What about him?
At this point, he's detained right now. I don't know.
He makes me mad.
Okay, I understand that, but like he said, once we do our investigation, we can figure this out. But we just need you guys to give us your names and stuff.
You have to let him go.
No, ma'am.
No.
You're not going to decide the outcome of this. We will decide, and we'll let you know how everything's going to happen here, okay? Sound okay?
It's so easy to judge these women from the outside because I think for a lot of people, it's difficult to understand why anyone would get involved in FLDS. But what we have to remember with this specifically is it's been around for a very long time. The FLDS has been around for, I believe, almost 100 years when it split off from mainstream Mormonism because the members wanted to continue practicing polygamy. So what we have to remember is that a lot of the members of this particular cult, they were born into the group. It is literally all they know. And a massive part of the teachings or the indoctrination is that they are living a life that is going to bring them to heaven, that is going to bring them and the world to salvation. Their only purpose, intention, reason for being alive is to serve God. And if their leadership, their family, the people they've known their entire lives are every single day constantly telling them how to live, they've seen no example of alternative ways of life or mainstream ways of life. They're not allowed to read mainstream books, watch television, go online, any of that sort of thing. They're totally closed off from society. So when we talk about some of the things that are still occurring but happened after Sam Bateman's arrest on this day, I want us to remember that these are people that it's almost like going to a country you've never been and you just experience that utter culture shock, and it kind of takes you some time to figure things out. The only example I can think of right now is like going to Spain and trying to go get groceries, but it happens to be during their siesta, and you're like, oh my gosh, how long do I have to wait to get these groceries? How long is this place going to be closed for? I'm on an agenda, not recognizing that this new place that you are in, they'd have a much different agenda than you. They have a much different way of life, and they are used to it because they do it every single day. So think about that, but on a massive scale where it's like every single practice, routine, everything you do every single day is drastically different than what the rest of society is doing. So you don't really see the error in your way. You don't recognize that you might be a minor who is being taken advantage of by an adult. And you also might not know that you are an adult taking advantage of a minor. So Sam Bateman gets arrested that day and is charged with 50 felonies. And then he gets released out on bail. Why? Why would we do that? I believe it's because they needed to find more tangible proof. So they ended up getting a search warrant for Samuel Bateman's house. And they discovered the next month, in September of 2022, that there were 9 underage girls living in his home. 9. So they took them and they placed him with different homes within the state. And then they arrest him again, and luckily they keep him locked up. But he is talking to those same adult wives and tries to convince them to kidnap the other 9 girls from those homes and get them out of state's custody. And I want to reiterate, these adult women are probably not fully aware that what they're doing is breaking a law. And if they did, they probably wouldn't care because they've had that indoctrination their entire life because they were born into a cult that this is what they have to do for salvation. They still don't fully understand that what they're doing is wrong. And this is when it's a good time to bring up the victim versus the perpetrator. They are victims, but they become the perpetrator because they are breaking the law or doing these terrible things on behalf of their leader who is breaking the law and is aware of their wrongdoing. And this happens in a lot of cults, especially as you get to see the members who are less on the fringe aspects of the cult but are part of the inner circle. They do start becoming the perpetrators. I mean, if we look at Allison Mack and Keith Raniere, she was a victim who was turned perpetrator, and she ended up getting convicted for her crimes, even though she's simultaneously a victim. And this is when things get really, really dangerous within cults, because on one hand, it's important to recognize when someone has been victimized and indoctrinated. But on the other hand, it's also important to hold people accountable for their wrongdoing, especially when it comes to the exploitation and abuse of children. So these adult wives, there's 3 of them, they end up being successful in kidnapping these children, and they were recovered in Spokane, Washington in December of 2022. So I don't know why we offer plea deals to people like this, but plea deals were offered, and Samuel Bateman actually pled guilty to 2 of the 50 counts brought against him, and he is going to be facing sentencing next month in October, so I will definitely be providing you all with an update. Unfortunately, one of his wives still continues to support him and even said on the stand that she still continues to support him, so that's very heartbreaking and sad to me. But again, she's also a victim. It's so difficult in situations like this because, like I said, it's really, really easy to want to go on the offensive towards the followers who are also victims who ended up becoming perpetrators. But it's also important to recognize and at least try to understand the indoctrination process and how intense it can be. And it's a really heartbreaking story for everyone involved because every single person involved in the FLDS, whether they were involved with Warren Jeffs or Samuel Bateman or both, their lives have been completely transformed in bad ways because of their experiences within the FLDS cult. And the reintegration back into society can feel so daunting to a lot of these members that even some have returned to become followers again because the outside world is too difficult. One of the people that work at Warren Jeff's old house, that like safe haven now for people who are trying to escape the group and get their, social security card and birth certificates and reintegrate into society, she actually escaped the cult and brought her 3 daughters with her. And when they turned 18, they went back to the cult. Probably because the outside world would seem so foreign and huge and scary to you. All of a sudden, you have no education, something that is required of you to get a job. And you've also never really had like a real job, maybe. And if you did have a job, you were sending all your money into the cult and living communally. So all of a sudden, you're thrust out. You have no friends. You have no family. You have no support network. You have no education. You have no job. you don't know what to believe in anymore, and everyone's telling you that you're a victim of abuse and you don't even understand what the word means. I can only imagine how challenging it would be to just even try to wrap your head around learning all of that information. And I just want to share that so that we understand why talking about it is so important and trying to understand more about it is so important, because, and maybe this is just me as a curious person, and when I don't understand something, I really do my best to try to understand it or just accept that it happens. But in this case, I just can't accept that it happens. But I just want us, if you take anything away from this video, I hope you take away the idea of understanding and trying to, instead of shame followers of cults, to try to see how and why they may have ended up the way that they ended up. And there are a ton of people now who speak out publicly about the FLDS. There's lots of TikTok videos, there's lots of Reddit threads, there are so many sad and eye-opening stories. So if you're more curious to see what that experience has been like, I mean, the deconstruction process is very extensive, and this group was very, very widespread. I mean, there are a lot of people who have overcome these teachings and this cult. So I just hope we can move forward with a lot more compassion, but also hold the people accountable who were culpable in these abuses towards children. Because just because you're in a cult doesn't mean that you aren't also guilty of doing terrible, terrible things. I think there are two things that can be true at once. We can offer empathy to people, but we can also at the same time hold them accountable for their wrongdoing, because holding them accountable will hopefully teach them a lesson. But honestly, I feel like people like Sam Bateman are just a disgusting lost cause. Please go rot in jail where you belong. Anyways, guys, that is all I have for you today. I hope it's always weird to say enjoyed this video, because how do you enjoy hearing details like this? But I hope you were able to appreciate this video. I hope you learned something, and I would just love to hear your comments down below. So please go ahead and share your opinions with me. Please stay safe out there, be careful, stay skeptical, and always ask questions. I will see you guys in my next video very, very soon, and thank you so much for being here today. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.